And John will be with you next week. Normally I'm here the first two, but John will be here next week. We have family coming from Western Washington and Eastern Washington. And so they're heading out on Sunday for a big journey. We're looking forward to seeing nephews and a grandniece that we haven't seen since she was a little girl. So we will miss you next week. And Julie said something interesting about John and Steve preaching an awful lot about Revelation, you know? Well, I just want you to know, Julie, we just put out the last two Revelation series for production for the television program, so you don't have to worry about that, okay? However, today is Daniel, okay? And we are writing a brand new series. Am I? Have guests coming up? I have an associate preacher right here. Oh, really? Batteries get old just like people do, don't they? There you go. Right? Did somebody say that's what Starbucks was for? I didn't say that, did I? Okay. I did. Appreciate that. Okay. I hope everybody's happy now. So, Julie, I do want to say, however, we are writing a brand new series on Daniel. So, I don't plan to do Daniel here every week, just so you know. But we are working on a series on the Judgement. And we actually started that very beginning of January. And we are going to look at that story. Do we have a... Still waiting to go my... we are going to look at the Judgment in a very unique way today. And that story that we want to look at is a story of how is it that God is going to present the judgment to a pagan king. So, oh yeah, City of Rocks, we can move right on. Okay, push the button. Yeah, you guys, they want me to turn the button on. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. So, have you ever really wanted to tell somebody something about God, but you just did not know what their religious frame of reference was? And so in Daniel chapter 2, you have an entire story of a king that had his own worship system, a pagan system of different gods, and an entirely different concept of what religion and faith was. And so one day, this king is just thinking about what his own future is and wondering what future is like. And then, well, we're going to have to read the story and find out, because we're going to walk through this entire story. Are you with me on this? We're going to start kind of in the middle. Daniel and his friends have already graduated. I want you to know that, from the University of Babylon. And they are just entering into their careers. And I want you to pay careful attention of how the story unfolds for them. It says, then the Chaldean spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. So, as the king was contemplating what his future was going to be like, he fell asleep. And I know you know this story, is that he had this remarkable dream. But when he woke up in the morning, all he could remember is that this dream was extraordinarily important, and he could not recall the details. Now, any of you ever have a dream that you know was significant, and you wake up and it just won't come back? That's what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. He is in this conundrum. So he just happens to have a staff of the smartest, most religious people in the world, literally, and he knows that they have the ability, are you ready for this? They have the ability to interpret dreams even ones they haven't been told. Now, they get a good salary for this. Maybe some of the highest paid people in the entire nation. And this is how we come to this moment in the story. The king replied to the Chaldeans, "The command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb to limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap." Now, you know, when you have a little bit of authority, you can kind of say things like this. But what I want you to understand is that this was said by a man who had the capacity to carry out what he was telling his people. "But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and reward and great honor. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation." And they answered a second time. And they said, "Let the king tell the dream to his servants. We will declare the interpretation." And the king replied, "I know for certain that you are bargaining for time, inasmuch as you have seen that the command from me is firm, that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation." The Chaldeans answered the king and said, "There is not a man on earth who could declare the matter to the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. Therefore, the things which the king demands is difficult, and there's no one else who could declare it to the king except God's, whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh." You know, they're close to right there, aren't they? Closer to right than what they actually realize. Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went forth, and the wise men should be slain. And they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. And then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. Now, wait just a moment here. You need to understand that Daniel and his friends are like in a brand new job. They're the bottom guys on the totem pole here. They haven't come up through the ranks. If this was your first week of work, how would you be feeling right now? What kind of conversations do you think you would have with your fellow workers? When things get really difficult, do you kind of come into yourself and discover who you are? He said to Arioch, the king's commander, "For what reason was the decree from the king's sword?" Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and informed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, about the matter, so that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. I want to just give you a little insight into Daniel and his friends. First of all, they're taken into captivity. Babylon has become the conqueror of Judah. They are taken into captivity. They are marched all the way to Babylon. They're put into the university. And Daniel and his friends are confronted with their first issue. And that first issue was what? It was diet. Now listen carefully. At the risk of their life and the life of their supervisor, they asked in faith if they could be given permission to have oatmeal with raisins every morning. Well, how do you know there were raisins? Well, because I heard the grapes were so big, it would take 2 men to carry a cluster of grapes. You realize how big a raisin in that oatmeal would be? I mean, you only have to put like 2 raisins in one can of oatmeal, and you'd have it made, right? And there was an agreement made in honor of some careful of exercising faith. Now we come through the story. They're graduated. We now encounter them in this situation. Nowhere are we told that Daniel has any idea that he knows how to interpret dreams. I want you to think about this. I want you to think for just a moment about spiritual gifts. If Daniel did not know he had the spiritual gift, how did he happen to come? You see, there's a difference between spiritual gifts and natural talents and abilities. This spiritual gift was manifested in Babylon when it was needed. I want you to think about this for just a moment. If God is the giver of good gifts, if the outpouring of the Holy Spirit brings gifts to the body of Christ, to the church itself, are you willing to go to the Lord as Daniel and his friends have prayed and be made available to receive the necessary gifts that this church needs to accomplish her purpose in this valley? We're not talking natural talents here. We're talking a spiritual gift is a gift that God gives to individuals that they be manifested in such a way to further the mission of God. And I find that to be one of the most rich, important portions of the book of Daniel, is that when the gifts are needed, God provides them. I want you to have anticipation as you enter into your prayer and your relationship with God. Are you willing and open for God to give you things needed to accomplish the purpose of the church? Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision, and Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And then Daniel said, "Let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and men and knowledge, to the wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and the hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise." Can you just imagine the joy at this moment in this man's life? For you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. It's a profound moment in Daniel's life. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and spoke to him as follows: "Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me into the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation to the king." Then Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel into the king's presence and spoke to him as follows. Just pause for a moment here. What is Daniel just about to do? In the name of God, he is about to intercede on the very lives of this group of the most important men outside of the king himself in the nation of Babylon. An intervention that came about by a group who chose to pray and to seek God. And God responded. Probably wasn't just an ordinary Wednesday night prayer meeting. But John, can I just stop here for a minute, do a commercial about the importance of Wednesday night prayer meeting. There's no more important time to pray corporately as a group than today, as we, as the Sun Valley Seventh-day Adventist Church, want to see God's blessing and want to see this church move outward and forward. And this story wouldn't have happened if these four men had not gotten on their knees. And may I say, this church will not move forward unless we are willing to come together and humbly before God seek His will, seek His wisdom, and seek His purposes. That's a side note to the sermon, just on John's benefit. All right. I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king. And the king said to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, "Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation?" And Daniel answered before the king and said, "As for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners are able to declare it to the king." Remember the question I asked at the beginning. Have you ever had someone who you knew had an entirely religious or non-religious experience ever come to you and inquire knowing about who your God is? This is a story about God's judgment in a way you probably don't normally think about. But I want you to just listen now, because out of that prayer experience with these young men comes words that are going to be spoken to a man who has the power over life and death, limb and property if you would, who has his own religious system in place, whom he believes deeply in. But I want you to hear how Daniel approaches. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while you were on your bed. As for you, O king, while you were on your bed, your thoughts turned to what would take place in the future. He who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. Station break for just a moment. I'm going to tell you, if you're at the grocery store, if you're at the bank, if you are anywhere people are, I'm going to tell you we have never had a time in which people are more interested and more concerned and more intrigued about what is coming in the future than the day we live in. What I just said is that we have never had greater opportunities to be able to speak to the situations and the truth that God has given to us as Adventist Christians, to talk about what is coming in the future. These are relevant and significant times. Verse 30, "But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me, or any wisdom residing in me more than any other living man, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king." What Daniel has just said, he said, look, all the knowledge God has given to me isn't about me. It's not about how much I know, how bright I am, how special I am. Is it possible that everything God has gifted to us as Seventh-day Adventists isn't given to us to make it about us? But about those who need to hear. The humility expressed here is profoundly significant when it comes to the religious matters of other people's lives. This isn't about how great he is. It isn't about how much he knows or how much God has revealed to him. He said the purpose of this revelation was for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. I want to say that the things we know and understand as Seventh-day Adventist friends are given to us. Humility is a profoundly significant point of the story. That you may understand the thoughts of your mind, you, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. And somebody said to me, is that word really in the Bible? And I said, yes, this is a quote mark right after it. It really was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breasts and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet of partly of clay and partly of iron, I should say. That's my reading into it. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. I begin this conversation telling you this is a story of judgment. The story is profoundly significant because if you use context for interpreting Scripture, this story is the context for all of the rest of the interpretations of the prophecies in the book of Daniel. It lays out a broad picture from the beginning to the end. The Babylonian Empire until the kingdom of Christ arrives. Thank you. You need to understand we just set the context for understanding the judgment. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so not a trace of them was found. Working definition of judgment is God setting things right. And to set things right, as God is now speaking through Daniel to King Nebuchadnezzar, setting things right is the rise and fall of humanity and its decline to the very end, and how it is gone and God fully establishes a brand new kingdom. God makes things right. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the fields, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand and caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. I need to ask you for just a moment. If you were able to imagine the mind of King Nebuchadnezzar sitting on the throne, and this humble man is standing before you and just said those very words, how would you feel? Did you notice that Daniel had no problem giving full acknowledgement and full authority to King Nebuchadnezzar? He didn't go in there and tell him how he needed to change all of his religion. He didn't need to go in there and fix him all up. He just simply said, you are the one that has been put in this power of authority over all things. Respect is an important attribute. To value another person and where they're at in their journey is of the utmost significance. After you, there will rise another kingdom inferior to you. That would be the Medes and the Persians at the time. Then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. That would be Greece. Then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, insomuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. That would be Rome. In that you saw the feet and toes partly of the potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, in as much as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. My minor was in art. Sculpture and pottery, painting, drawing were all part of that degree. I can tell you that when we would take a brick of porcelain or Columbia River clay or whatever it was, that we had to take and make certain that there was no iron particles left in that clay. Because if you were to make a beautiful sculpture or bowl or plate, whatever, and there was a particle of iron in the clay, and you put it in the kiln and fired it, it would just simply blow a hole in it or explode the piece. So in this vision, when you're looking at the iron and clay mixed together, what Nebuchadnezzar is hearing through Daniel is that the rise of mankind from Babylon down to the end of time is that we're moving into a greater time of instability, and there cannot be cohesion. And we, by the way, our democracy's roots are where? From the Greco-Roman Empire, right? And notice how that iron went all the way down to the end, and that iron is still included in the feet and the clay. Did you notice that? It's like not gone away, folks. We are part of that iron experience as Americans. In fact, most of the world where democracy exists. But the instability of iron and clay together is God is telling Nebuchadnezzar that that instability is going to increase as time proceeds on. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and some of it will be brittle. Now the interpretation. And in it you saw the iron mixed with common clay. They will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. If this is a description of modern society at the end of time, we're seeing transitions happen. We talked about a really wonderful conversation earlier this morning with Julie about the importance of free will and choice. Are you paying attention to what is happening to choice within the social structures of our society? Listen carefully. I'm not trying to be political. This is not, but it's an observation that if you are a Democrat, you can't have free will. And if you are a Republican, you cannot have free will. As we're watching the political shift, you've got to toe the mark now, or you're not considered part of us. You have to act like us and think like us. Kind of sounds like that brittle iron. I'm strong, you're brittle. We're seeing that manifested at this level within our own culture and society. But don't just stop there. Does that spill over into religion? Does it spill over into education? Does it not affect everything that we're watching, this division, this instability, I'm more right than you, as just an infection in almost everything in the world, both in the church and home? But if we listen to the story, like King Nebuchadnezzar is listening to the story, we are not shocked. We are not coming apart. We don't panic. We don't run in fear. We don't have to jump this ship or that ship. We understand this was already known and is now being shared with this pagan king about the entire history of humanity, even in a time he wouldn't even exist. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron and the bronze and the clay and the silver and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. I told you this was a judgment story. What does the judgment look like to King Nebuchadnezzar? At the end of the story, as the decline of man continues to greater levels of instability, and may I just say that if I had done a sculpture and did iron and clay at the feet of the sculpture, I would have gotten in debt because my sculpture would have fallen over. It wouldn't have made it to the crate. If that is the truth of humanity, does God set things right at the end? And is he not telling Nebuchadnezzar, this pagan king, that he will set things right? So, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel. Gave orders to present to him an offering and fragrance and incense. The king answered Daniel and said, surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him a ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made requests of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon, while Daniel was at the feast. I'm going to tell you, as a young person, when you are suddenly put in charge over a bunch of folks that are highly experienced and been around a long time before you, I just want you to know that that's not an easy job. That requires incredible skill and patience and understanding of human nature. But Nebuchadnezzar had a life-changing moment in this story because he grasped something of the judgment being good news. Did you notice how God chose to tell the story to Nebuchadnezzar? It's not this big lake of fire to terrify and scare people. There's not some kind of eternal torment taking place here. It just simply lays out the story for Nebuchadnezzar. It's like, here's the history of mankind. Here's man's behavior. And here's God's remedy to the situation. Because he will rectify it and establish a kingdom in which all of this is blown away in the wind. Today we can look at it and say the only thing that is going to remain is God's unconditional agape love and a kingdom that will not fade. We just get small glimpses of that today. In the entire rest of the book of Daniel, that story, from its beginning to end, you can take every other prophecy and lay it right along that story all the way down to the end. It continues to tell the same story over and over and over. Now, point of interest. In chapter 2, Daniel shifts his language and he begins to write these stories from chapter 2 up through verse 6 into part of 7. He's writing them in Aramaic, so that all of the Jewish captives who have been taken into Babylon, this would be their common language. This would be the language they would speak. They would be able to read the stories and understand them. So with all the people who lived in Babylon as well. But when it came time to write those prophecies at the end of time, Daniel then writes them in Hebrew for the Jewish nation to be paying attention, so they could study and read them as well. I want to say this again. There is this message called the Judgment Hour message, where God is going to make things right. The best news in the whole world. It was a great day for King Nebuchadnezzar. He saw something, and God instructed him to something which. But think about this in the story. Can you identify a little bit with King Nebuchadnezzar? The joy of discovering things he never knew before. Can you identify with Daniel and his three friends having their lives online to be able to perform their duties in the palace itself, gripped with a certain level of fear, but total confidence? May we arrive at the judgment hour message at the beginning of the whole year. Is it really good news that God's going to set them aside? Then you are invited. You are in fact called in your relationship with God to find and discover that story of treasure, to share it with the Nebuchadnezzars that God brings into your life. Because there will be an aha moment. I think that's exciting. You get to share in Daniel's experience. That's why we're here. Absolutely a fabulous lunch right down the hall. That's a good thing. I've seen some of it already. It's really good. So we do hope to see you there. Father, this is a very ancient story. Back 605, 400, somewhere in that era BC. And yet, this book has been preserved so that today we could take a page, look at the words, and have just a moment in the life of Daniel, the life of King Nebuchadnezzar, and realize what a great day it was for all the wise men of Babylon because of one young man called to minister way beyond his years. Father, may we cherish these lessons. May we go back and visit them again. Father, may we have the courage to find ourselves in these stories. May it reveal to us the truth of who we are. Thank you, we ask for that journey in the name of Jesus. Amen.